Church calendar features several Gregorys. Gregory the Illuminator, two of the three Cappadocian fathers, namely Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus, and of course our Gregory of Rome, often called Gregory the Great, but sometimes referred to in the Orthodox Church as Gregory the Dialogist, from his likely authorship of a work entitled Dialogues on the Miracles of the Italian Fathers. Of the 4 books of the Dialogues, the first 3 are devoted to miracle stories, featuring a large number of mostly obscure saints. The second book focused on Saint Benedict, constituting a major source for his life. The 4th and final book of Dialogues presents the soul as imperishable and intended for eternal happiness. The dialogue form of this work recalls that of Plato's dialogues, where the conversation partners, other than Socrates, generally have little of substance to say. This is also true in the case of Gregory and his conversation partner in his dialogues, but with him as well as with Plato, the dialogue format keeps the work more lively and engaging than it would be otherwise. Also, the short speeches of his deacon Peter give Gregory opportunity to draw lessons from the accounts he has narrated. Already Pope, when he wrote this work, Gregory produced it at the urging of members of the papal household who had heard the stories directly from him. What purpose were dialogues meant to serve? Odo John Zimmerman, their Benedictine translator, provides an answer. Benedict wanted his fellow Italians to realize that they were living in a land of saints, and that great miracles were as numerous among the fathers of Italy as they had been among the fathers of the desert and elsewhere. The book was also written to comfort and encourage the people of Italy during one of the most disheartening periods of their history. The wars between the Emperor Justinian and the barbarian Goths for the mastery of the country had left much of it a wilderness. Men and women had to live in constant dread of the savage Lombard hordes that swept down into Italy in 568 and were still slaying and pillaging wherever they turned. Floods and plagues and a long series of famines added to the general gloom. Many even felt that the final destruction of the world was at hand. To all this sorrow and catastrophe that Zimmerman recounts, Gregory's dialogues presented an antidote, an invitation to be afraid no longer. Gregory, who came to be recognized by many as the greatest of all popes, spoke a clear message in a time of horrible crisis. God had not deserted his people. The church in this country needs to speak a clear message of hope in the face of the numerous crises afflicting this land and many others. Perhaps we can take a cue from Gregory. We can declare that saints remain active in today's America, and that miracles still happen here. God's providence is not limited to other lands, other centuries. To this, immediate objections may be raised. Gregory represented late antiquity, or he was the first medieval man, take your pick. Either way, his worldview differed greatly from our own. But maybe his worldview was not so different as we commonly assume. Many of the stories and dialogues center on the working of miracles, and these stories often echo stories in Scripture. Before long, Gregory's diaconal sidekick, Peter, asks why there are not wonder workers in today's world. To this, Gregory replies, "I believe there still are many such men in the world, Peter. One cannot conclude that there are no great saints just because no great miracles are worked. The true estimate of life, after all, lies in acts of virtue, not in the display of miracles. There are many, Peter, who without performing miracles are not at all inferior to those who perform them." Gregory believed that miracles occur, but that acts of virtue are no less important. One way for us to approach this is to widen our understanding of miracles. St. Augustine seems to support this view when he points out that what Jesus did at a wedding at Cana is the same work he does annually through vines. Some ordinary events in the natural order are signs of God that deserve to be celebrated as such, and some acts of decency appear so widespread and influential that they are nothing short of God at work in the public order and deserve to be recognized as such. For a decade, I have served on the board of the Francis Perkins Center in Maine. This is not a faith-based organization. However, our board members, staff members, and the general public are coming to recognize that the extraordinary life of Francis Perkins, sometimes called the woman behind the New Deal, was based in her Christian faith, and that her church celebrates the life and witness of this labor secretary with an annual feast day on May 13th. When I speak about all this, I sometimes say that the addition of saints to the Episcopal Church calendar does not require the certification of miracles, but that New Deal provisions such as Social Security are certainly miracles of a sort.
Amen.
They have touched millions of lives for good and continue to do so. They have softened the hearts of many Americans toward their neighbors in need and continue to do so. Although an increasing number of Americans are delighted to learn of Francis Perkins, many remain unaware of her continuing contributions to our national life. Canadians, any Canadians in the room? Canadians seem far more informed about their history. The outstanding figure in the establishment of the Canadian National Health System was a social gospel minister and politician named Tommy Douglas, 1904 to 1986. In a 2004 CBC television competition, he was voted the greatest Canadian of all time. Gregory had stories to tell, and he told them. They were stories about saints, including many close to him in space and time. I contend that the same is true for us. As a favorite hymn declares, "The world is bright with the joyous saints who love to do Jesus' will." The dramatic expansion of our church calendar in recent decades is a welcome part of this, but much more remains to be done. There is an urgency about this work, for the public is aware of numerous athletes, entertainers, and politicians, some of them people of questionable character. But the public is often unacquainted with people, Christian or otherwise, who lived lives of costly and heroic virtue, and whose witness is dear to God. Even if their names are known, it is often not recognized that these people were motivated by their faith. There are probably many Americans who recognize the name of Martin Luther King Jr., but are unaware that he was a Baptist clergyman. As the church, we can do better at dispelling this ignorance. Without caving into trendiness, we can exercise prophetic imagination, turning from the consciousness and perception of the dominant order around us to an alternative consciousness and perception, one bright with the promise of the Beatitudes. This can happen, and all of us can take part. Earlier, I mentioned the Cappadocian Fathers, three patristic theologians who helped establish the classic Christian understanding of the triune God. Each of them, Basil, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Gregory of Nyssa, has a separate feast day on our church's calendar, but they have long been identified by their common geographical moniker. Another saintly trio, Zenaida, Philonella, and Hermione, were recently added to our calendar, where they share April 14th as a feast day. They are known as unmercenary physicians, the first recognized participants in a long line of Christian healers celebrated under this title, especially in the Orthodox Church. The memory of these three can do much to transform our moral imaginations in 21st century America as we wrestle with the ethics and economics of healthcare in our time. With such examples in mind, I would like to propose a similar group for the church to recognize and vigorously publicize. Let's call them the Washington Midwives. This group would include Frances Perkins, Paula Murray, and Eleanor Roosevelt. Frances and Polly are already on our calendar, with May 13th and July 1st feast days, respectively. Eleanor is not, but the topic of her inclusion has been raised. What makes these three the Washington Midwives is how they were active in the nation's capital and helped with the birthing of a new social order, which continues to benefit Americans and the entire planet. I label them in the awareness that midwives, while frequently women, are not necessarily women. Yes, there are male midwives, and likely others who would not identify with either end of the conventional binary. Eleanor, Polly, Frances, all three were Christians. All three were Episcopalians. And I dare say each of them believed and acted upon their firm belief that America required further social development, additional American revolutions within the national and international spheres. Those who would benefit included workers, people of color, and the oppressed of many nations. All these and others would benefit. The beliefs of these three about what the future could become were exercises in Christian hope. Although for them the playing field was largely not the church, but government and society. Each of these took a different path in accordance with their gifts and skills and opportunities. A brief word about each. Frances Perkins became a social worker near the dawn of that profession. First in New York State, then in the federal government, she served as an advocate for the disenfranchised and a powerful friend of workers as organized labor struggled for acceptance in a severely capitalist society. Her service as labor secretary and the first female cabinet member extended into all 4 terms of the FDR presidency. A devout Anglo-Catholic who was labor secretary retreated monthly to an Episcopal convent here in Maryland. Frances Perkins was a person of sharp mind and strong will, who devoted her substantial gifts to the service of Christ, whom she encountered especially in the Blessed Sacrament and in working people. While never elected to public office, government service was the predominant channel through which she changed the world. For more about her religion, see Tread the City's Streets Again. Frances Perkins shares her theology by my friend and colleague, Don Mitchell. Paula Murray presented as a woman in a misogynist society, lived as a black person in a racist society, and struggled as a non-binary person in a world that did not know that term. A brilliant student, she was denied entrance to the University of North Carolina graduate school because of her race, and to Harvard Law School because of her gender. She was nurtured in a church that was not free of prejudice, yet late in life she became the Episcopal Church's first African-American female priest. While an accomplished writer, especially of autobiography, her most incisive work was as a lawyer, a champion of civil rights, who partnered with another Washington Episcopalian, Thurgood Marshall, who is himself commemorated by our church on May 17th. A major resource on Polly that has recently appeared is To Speak a Defiant Word, Sermons and Speeches on Justice and Transformation by Polly Murray, edited by Anthony B. Pinn. Eleanor Roosevelt, though a child of privilege, underwent deep suffering early in life that transformed her into a strong, resolute, and articulate person, an advocate for all who needed to be heard in high places. In that role, she seemed to turn up everywhere in the United States during her husband's unparalleled 4 terms as president. After his death, she became a delegate to a new worldwide organization, the United Nations, where she played a major role in establishing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For this work, she is depicted on the human rights porch of the Washington National Cathedral. For many years, she wrote a popular column that appeared in many newspapers. In all, she produced nearly 6,000 columns, characterized by humanity and hope, without a ghostwriter or a missed deadline. The vast literature on Eleanor Roosevelt includes Eleanor, a spiritual biography, the faith of the 20th century's most influential woman, by Harold Ivan Smith. Gregory the Great published his dialogues, making the case that his time and place was not devoid of wonder-working saints. The church in our time and place can make a similar case by presenting effectively the examples of people such as those I call the Washington midwives. Here, the miracles, signs of divine action in the world, involve economic, social, and political transformations linked with the transformation of human hearts. All of these are related to the exercise of prophetic imagination, where the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us give way to an alternative consciousness and perception, more in accord with the reign of God. What specific actions can the Church today take regarding recent saints that reflect what Gregory did in his dialogues? Here are a couple suggestions. Parishes and other church communities can recognize, as part of their gospel outreach, repeatedly telling the story through word, image, and action of saints who are part of their local history. What's required is a measure of prophetic imagination. Each of the Washington midwives is the focus of one or more institutions that are not church communities. The church can partner in various ways with these institutions to the benefit of everyone involved. What's required is a measure of prophetic imagination. An important justification for the church making better known the Washington midwives and similar figures is that it shines a spotlight on issues of vocation. The Washington midwives, who include a cabinet secretary, an attorney, and a diplomat, can help rehabilitate public service at a time when it is subject to immense criticism, both justified and unjustified. We can encourage rising generations to take up opportunities for public service and to do so as part of an authentic Christian calling. All this takes is a measure of prophetic imagination.